thank Congresswoman Christensen for her leadership. She serves as the first vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and has led on so many issues in this House on behalf of our country and on behalf of her constituents. Thank you very much. Let me also take a moment to thank Congresswoman Fudge and Congresswoman Jackson Lee, Congressman Bobby Scott, Chairman Rangel, for their leadership in defending the most basic element of our democracy, the right to vote. I'd also like to thank our Congressional Black Caucus Chair, Emanuel Cleaver, for his focus on this very critical issue. His leadership is making such a difference on so many important issues in our country. The right to vote is our most fundamental right that guarantees and preserves all other legal rights. When Americans lose their right to vote, that endangers their ability to defend further attacks on their rights. The assault on voters' rights continues in 2012. In this election year, a coordinated campaign designed to block access to the polls to tens of millions of Americans threatens to undermine our democracy and change election outcomes. And sadly, Mr. Speaker, it's no secret which communities these laws are designed to disenfranchise. Communities of color, students, elderly Americans, impoverished families, and the disabled. Let me say that the Republican legislators and governors who are pushing these anti-voter laws know exactly what they are doing. They saw the election results of 2008 with the surge of voter participation from Americans who had never voted before. They see the rising tide of Americans who seek to change their country by doing their basic civic duty on Election Day. Instead of embracing change, they are desperately trying to avoid change by undermining our voting process. These Republican legislators are proposing partisan laws that require voters to show a government-approved photo ID before voting. Those who are truly concerned about voter fraud have plenty of actual documented problems to take on. Why aren't they going after those who spread false information meant to trick voters or public officials who improperly purge eligible voters or political operatives who tamper with election equipment and forms? Instead, they all are pushing laws designed to change election outcomes by reducing voting, repressing turnout, and turning the clock back. Now, I have an aunt who is 100 years old, who was born at a time when records were not kept like they are today. How in the world would my aunt know where to start to find her birth certificate to be eligible to qualify for a government ID? How can I ask her to pay to do the research so she can figure out where her birth certificate may be and then pay to get a government ID to vote? Outrageous. 100 years ago, my aunt did not have the right to vote. Thanks to the hard work of those who came before us, my aunt witnessed the expansion of voting rights to women with the 19th Amendment and the protection of African American and other minority voters with the Voting Rights Act. These regressive laws seek to turn my aunt back to where she was a century ago, when she could not vote and her fundamental right to fully participate in our democratic society was cut off, mind you, just cut off by unjust laws. These partisan laws are shameful and a disgrace to our country. These anti-democratic efforts have no place in a modern democracy, and we must unmask these shameful attempts to disenfranchise voters. We encourage democracy and voting rights all around the world. I was an observer in the first election in South Africa. President Nelson Mandela was elected. I was an observer in the 90s in Nigeria. I witnessed long lines of people waiting patiently to vote. People believed and said to me that in America, voting was encouraged rather than discouraged. So we need to stop these partisan efforts that strike at the core of our democracy. It really is, Congresswoman Christensen, fundamentally anti-American. We have to win this war against voters. We should be about dismantling and reducing barriers so we can reignite their hope for the American dream. I want to again thank you for your leadership, and Congresswoman Fudge and Jackson Lee and Bobby Scott and Mr. Rangel and the entire Congressional Black Caucus for their calls and their hard work to protect the right to vote for all citizens across this nation. We must protect voters from these attempts to deny access to the heart of our democratic process. We need to move forward and encourage more voter participation. People need to know that they have a stake in this system and in this democracy. These laws were designed to stop that. Thank you again.